Anger, sadness, fear across the country. Emotions ran pretty high last week in response to news out of Ferguson, Missouri. But it is this small act of compassion that went viral just a few days ago. During a demonstration in Portland, Oregon Tuesday, Sergeant Brett Barnum says that he noticed 12-year-old Devontae Hart crying and wearing a sign offering free hugs. So the officer obliged.
This is an everyday thing for us, and it just happened to be captured one frame in time that the men and women of the Police Bureau and actually across the United States, they do good work like this every day. It just doesn't get captured. There's been a lot of tears shed on my part, and I know a lot of other people's parts, and it's the humanity in us, and we just try and be good humans.
Well, very good humans indeed. Love that picture. Very powerful. Unfortunately, police-involved deaths have been more prominent in the headlines in recent months. The Michael Brown shooting was preceded by the chokehold death of Eric Garner. Then just last week, 12-year-old boy was shot for carrying what turned out to be just a pellet gun. And an unarmed man in Brooklyn killed by an officer's bullet shot apparently by accident in a darkened housing project stairwell, all triggering calls for change. Well, joining me right now, James Peterson, an MSNBC contributor and professor and director of Africana Studies at Lehigh University, and Edward Mamet, a retired NYPD captain who spent 40 years in the department and now serves as an expert on police procedures. And with a welcome, gentlemen, to both of you. James, I'll reach out long distance to you first. As late yesterday, Darren Wilson announcing he's resigning from the Ferguson Police Force. He released a letter that reads in part, quote, "It was my hope to continue in police work, but the safety of other police officers and the community are of the paramount importance to me. It is my hope that my resignation will allow the community to heal." So do you have any expectation for change for the protesters or perhaps Brown's family as they take this in?
Well, I don't think his resignation is going to necessarily help the community heal. Certainly, it's not going to mean too much to the Brown family. They're still in pain and anguish, not just from the grand jury decision to not indict Officer Wilson, but they're still in pain and anguish from going through their first Thanksgiving without Mike Brown being at that Thanksgiving dinner table. And so I think the family is really looking for other ways of recourse and resolution for this issue. His resignation, I don't think, bears too much on what they're thinking and feeling and what they have to endure at this particular moment.
I'm curious, Edward, when you look at these recent cases, do you think better police training might have had a different outcome? Because when you look at the officers involved in both the Cleveland and Brooklyn shootings, they were pretty new to the job.
Well, I must say that New York City, and I spent 40 years in the department, has probably one of the best training programs in the country. So the shooting in Brooklyn, I doubt if it had any problems with the training. The officer may have been scared, maybe he was negligent in what he did, but it has not been a result of training. But
he was walking in that stairwell with his gun drawn out of the holster, I mean, ready to go.
Well, there's no problem with that because the use of a firearm is discretionary, and the department has certain guidelines, but you can't tell a cop not to have his weapon out when he or she believes there's danger. The thing is that you have to be very careful in how you deal with it. Now, the problem we have today is that there was a changeover from revolvers to semi-automatic pistols. And the revolvers were not so easily discharged accidentally, but the semi-automatics are.
So what about a taser? Would that have made a difference? Would that be as effective?
No, tasers are not practical in a situation like that. You need time to set it up. You need time to, you have to see your target, first of all. He didn't know that the kid was there.
Yeah. James, ProPublica recently did a study of federal data on police shootings, which it is worth noting are notoriously underreported. Now, they found that young black men are, ready for it, 21 times, more likely to be shot dead by police than young white men. So what does that do to the psyche within these communities?
Well, I think long term, what it does is the collective consciousness of a community has a sort of abiding distrust of law enforcement and abiding distrust of the criminal justice system. And Mr. Mamet is right that the officers of the law have to use their discretion. But unfortunately, police officers, just like the rest of us, make decisions based upon their own experiences and their own biases. And so when they're making a decision about whether to use lethal force or not, sometimes racial bias informs those decisions. That's the reality of it. And so we're talking about having a different layer of training here where people can become more aware of what these biases are, how they inform their decisions. I mean, we're really talking about a long haul process here. There's no quick fix. You know, you can put cameras on every police officer, but that's not necessarily going to change the kind of ways in which biases inform the decisions that they make when they're making those quick discretionary choices. I'm not trying to exonerate any of these officers. I think they have to be accountable for what they've done. But the reality is now we are decades, if not scores of years, into this really deep distrust between poor communities and communities of color and the law enforcement institutions that are charged with serving and protecting them.
Something that's interesting, Edward, I know the NYPD has taken great strides to provide a very diverse police force to reflect its community, but that is not the case in Ferguson, Missouri. Do you think that is essential to proper community policing?
Yes, I do. I feel that police departments should represent the community. The problem is getting the qualified people. It's, you know, the New York City Police Department has for years tried very hard to recruit people from minority groups, Hispanics, blacks, and it's always been very difficult. For some reason, maybe it was a cultural, they didn't want to take the job. Now, under Commissioner Kelly, that was greatly improved. We now have where the so-called minorities are now a majority in the police department. There are less white officers than there are Hispanic and the black and other groups combined. So I believe that diversity in a police department is important.
James, what about your thoughts on that?
It's important. I think we have to realize the reason why there's not a good pipeline of people of color to police their own communities is because of that deep-seated mistrust, which has sort of, again, been boiling over for decades now. And so I think that's part of the pipeline issue. But let's be clear here. Just because the police force looks like the community is policing doesn't mean that we'll account for all the kinds of bias. Racial bias affects black folk and Latino folk the same way it affects white folk. And so we really have to talk about a deeper, more systemic social scientific issue in order to get to the core of some of these challenges, Alex. And unfortunately, it's a long haul process here. There's no shortcuts. We have to begin the process now. It's a different layer of training. And in order to make it work, and again, it impacts the pipeline issue as well as the immediacy of people being able to police their own communities. It's a radical reordering of what policing is, though. And I think that that's the only way forward. That's the only way that we're going to actually see progress and stop seeing some of these sort of unjustified murders of unarmed young people of color.
Okay. Well, Edward Mamet and James Peterson, gentlemen, thank you so much. I appreciate the discussion.